Thank you to TrueQ and Women in Data for offering us the perfect opportunity to put on our data hats and make sense of a global pandemic. Team Epiphany has chosen to take a descriptive and diagnostic approach to examine how different countries have experienced the pandemic. We would like to raise awareness to the fact that this pandemic will have polarizing implications long after the vaccine has been administered. In this first section of our presentation, I would like to take you through our exploratory analysis. Here we assessed COVID-19 cases per capita from day 0 to October 2020, in conjunction with the purchasing power parity of a country. This is depicted in this world map, with the color representing the purchasing power parity and the size of the circles representing the amount of COVID-19 cases. The initial analysis revealed insights in line with what we've seen in the media, along with a few surprises. The USA, having one of the strongest economies with a GDP purchasing power parity of 57.5 thousand, cannot seem to get out from under this virus, with 2,300 cases per capita and 211,000 deaths to date. Europe has been deemed the epicenter of the virus, with a cluster of strong economies who have been hard hit by COVID-19. The likes of Ireland, the United Kingdom, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, and Sweden. What is interesting to see that there are two very small European countries with thriving economies who have alarming COVID-19 statistics. This is Andorra and Luxembourg. Andorra equates its large numbers to the commute which takes place from Spain and France. Luxembourg's official stance is that its rigorous testing of 200,000 people per day is what has resulted in these large COVID-19 statistics of 1,448 cases per capita. It's food for thought that Luxembourg could know what the rest of the world is yet to find out. In line with the praise received in the media, we can see that Oceania, depicted here, Australia and New Zealand, seem to have come out pretty unscathed by the virus. What I haven't come across in the media is what is going on in the Middle East. There's a cluster of strong economies who seem to be quite hard hit. The likes of Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. Though cases are on the rise, deaths are lessening. This can be attributed to the young age of the population who are less risk averse and expat travel in the area. What we found alarming as a team was the state of the Maldives, with a GDP purchasing power parity of 14,900 and 2,000 cases per capita. This is due to them being forced to open their borders in mid-July, as the economy is dependent on tourism. This global overview, which we have presented, demonstrated that there may just be one virus, but there are 7 billion different experiences. It is clear that we all may be in the same storm, but we are all in different boats. In the next section of our analysis, we want to take a look at how some of the world's strongest governments and economies have been impacted by the virus. New Zealand versus Sweden, a tale of two policies. In the analysis performed here, we have taken new cases for New Zealand and deaths for New Zealand over the period of the pandemic, from their first case to the beginning of October 2020. We've performed the same analysis for Sweden. New Zealand and Sweden reported their first cases on the 28th and 27th of Feb, respectively. New Zealand was a 60-year-old woman returning from Iran. Sweden's case was traced to a traveler from Wuhan. Approximately 1 month after the first case was reported, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand instituted a severe lockdown, stating, "You can recover from economic slump, but you cannot recover from death." This lockdown lasted a month. Sweden adopted the approach of herd immunity, looking to allow the virus to spread through the population, thus allowing immunity to build. Sweden did not believe there was sufficient scientific evidence to warrant a lockdown, and as we can see, there is no lockdown statistics. Sweden was of the opinion that performing a lockdown with this lack of scientific evidence was an infringement on freedom to move freely. If we look here at the analysis of Sweden and New Zealand with regard to other contributing factors to COVID-19, we can see that New Zealand and Sweden seem very closely aligned when it comes to rule of law, government effectiveness. Sweden does have a larger investment in healthcare, we can see. They have a lower prevalence of smoking and obesity. What Sweden may not have considered adequately is the 20% of their population in the high-risk category over the age of 65 and the smoking prevalence that is experienced in their population. Sweden seemed to have relied on the health of their population and the social norms of distancing within the population. Though this is far from over, it seems from this depiction that New Zealand's strategy has come out superior, with 31 cases per capita and 25 deaths. It was a combination of compassionate leadership, good science, and good sense. The New Zealand economy did take a knock with a GDP contraction of 12.2% in 2020. Sweden, on the other hand, sees cases continue to rise as no lockdown has been put in place, still relying on herd immunity. Sweden is at 935 cases per capita with 5,800 deaths, mostly the elderly in care homes. Though they did not institute a lockdown, the Swedish economy is not unaffected by the global recession. Sweden has seen a 4% downturn in GDP. So this raises the question, how much are we willing to pay for a life? Now, in this next section of our presentation, we're going to consider if global economic superpowers like the USA, Sweden, and the United Kingdom are crumbling under the pressures of this virus, have we stopped to think about how the already vulnerable developing countries have fared? Here we look at consequences to the developing countries, and I'd like to take you to our analysis of Brazil and Sweden. Similar to our, of Brazil and South Africa. Similar to our analysis of Sweden and New Zealand, we have looked at new cases over the time period, deaths over the time period, as well as the policies adopted for both Brazil and South Africa. Both South Africa and Brazil were praised for their response to the containment of this virus in early March and April 2020. But now we know This was just the calm before the storm. After South Africa's first case on the 6th of March, a strict lockdown akin to that of New Zealand was implemented for 21 days. There we go, we can see it there. Brazil lagged in a lockdown and instituted strict measures in mid-May. Here's Brazil's measures of lockdown. These countries had to act swiftly and firmly due to the high rate of pre-existing conditions in the population, having some of the highest rates of HIV and tuberculosis. Additionally, overcrowding in informal communities, squatter camps and in South Africa and favelas in Brazil were also a cause for concern. If we look at the statistics provided for both Brazil and South Africa, we could easily contribute the rise of the virus post such strict lockdown measures to things like government effectiveness and rule of law. And while they might have a place, we need to also look at the socioeconomic conditions in these countries. Informal communities are not made for lockdown. Domestic violence and crimes of passion were at an all-time high. The informal communities in these countries rely on daily income to secure their next meal. Both Brazil and South Africa could not maintain their lockdowns as needed. Luckily, if we go back to our timeline, South Africa seems to be recovering due to the warm weather it's currently experiencing. Brazil is still raking up some of the record high numbers of the pandemic around the world. As noted in the earlier case of the Maldives, a recession for some may seem like starvation and death for others. The balancing act of lockdown against economic repercussions continues to reverberate throughout the world as we await a vaccine. Debates rage on about the inaccuracy and inconsistency of the data reported, and we seem to lose sight of our own humanity and awareness of the loss of freedom and absences of basic needs that have existed on this planet for many years. Developing countries cannot navigate this alone. COVID-19 will not be beaten when the vaccine arrives. It will be beaten when the socio-economic effects are collectively addressed across the globe. Thank you from Team Epiphany. Thank you to TrueQ and Women in Data for offering us the perfect opportunity to put on our data hats and make sense of a global pandemic. Team Epiphany has chosen to take a descriptive and diagnostic approach to examine how different countries have experienced the pandemic. We would like to raise awareness to the fact that this pandemic will have polarizing implications long after the vaccine has been administered. The balancing act of lockdown against economic repercussions continues to reverberate throughout the world as we await a vaccine. Debates rage on about the inaccuracy and inconsistency of the data reported, and we seem to lose sight of our own humanity and awareness of the loss of freedom and absences of basic needs that have existed on this planet for many years. Developing countries cannot navigate this alone. COVID-19 will not be beaten when the vaccine arrives. It will be beaten when the socio-economic effects are collectively addressed across the globe. Thank you from Team Epiphany.